how they got into blockchain and what their current project is they're working on. So take it away, guys. Just start right here with Darren.
Hi, my name is Darren Tracy. I'm actually probably the least involved in the blockchain community at this point, but I work in trading and finance and technology and have for the 13 plus years I've been in Chicago. And with that background, since 2013, I've been very interested in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, and that's really my area of expertise is the currency and trading side of it. I guess on the side, you know, I've experimented with various opportunities in market making and arbitrage and really consulting and advising others in the community how to get involved. And I really think that that's what's important, is getting people into the ecosystem, because I do believe that this is going to be the future of the economy, the future of the internet.
Hi everybody, my name is Alexandra Prodromos, but I go by Lexi familiarly. So I'm the executive director of a nonprofit that's both publicly and privately supported called the Chicago Blockchain Center. We've been around about a year. We're supported by the state of Illinois' Illinois Blockchain Initiative and various private partners, including CME Group, DRW, Lightbank, and then Block, which is also a company I work for. We specialize in enterprise-grade blockchain technology. We're headquartered in Chicago. We've been around for about 2 years now, co-founded by Matthew Rozak, who is the lead at Tally Capital. And Matt has been investing in the space the last 6-7 years. He's kind of a globally renowned thought leader in this space. But as a native Chicagoan, really wanted to kind of jumpstart the community in Chicago and kind of aggregate and connect a lot of these disparate parties that were really interested in the cryptocurrency and blockchain space in Chicago and Illinois, but didn't really have any kind of a resource or kind of like connecting agent. So he started the Chicago Blockchain Center kind of with that mentality in mind. I myself got into the cryptocurrency blockchain space about 3-4 years ago. Was the first time I heard about Bitcoin. Was actually from a cousin of mine in Greece. I'm of Greek descent, and so there's quite a bit of my family over there. And so I think it was around 2015 when Greece actually, they kind of became very interested in Bitcoin specifically. I think a lot of the more kind of intuitive use cases behind cryptocurrency are more kind of easily seen in countries that don't have any kind of trust in their financial institutions, like Greece was at the time and arguably still is. But once so that was kind of the first time I heard of it, kind of discounted it. Started really diving into it again later that year as I was a pre-law student in undergrad. I was a political science major, it's my degree, and I was really interested in the nexus between law and tech and how one would be disrupted by the other. There was this thing that was launched that year called smart contracts there's a thing that year launched called Ethereum, which had this capability called smart contracts. And so being the pre-law student I said, okay, contracts, there's probably something that relates here. But once I just started really studying the stuff, I kind of realized that blockchain is going to be transformative for more than just the legal space, and really any industry that transfers things of value in a digital way. So that was really kind of how I got into it. And just after finishing undergrad, I approached the state of Illinois and worked as the only non-government worker to form the Illinois Blockchain Initiative. That was a couple of years ago now. And so shortly after that, I joined Block, and then now we're kind of continuing that work with the Chicago Blockchain Center. So it's great to be here, though.
My name is Robert Elder. I am the new president and publisher of Blockchain News. So we track all of the new initiatives. We also report on the, the shaman, pirates, and visionaries of blockchain technology and cryptocurrency. So I became aware of cryptocurrency and blockchain technology a few years ago. It was part of our reporting, our beat reporting for Cranes. So many of you know Cranes Chicago. And my previous job was to grow them from 4 let me see, 4 cities to 36. So I went from there and am here now building a worldwide, rather than just US-wide, reporting structure. So there's a lot to do and a lot that's a lot of fun.
So can we get a quick round of applause for these guys? So we're definitely really excited they're here. And just one more point I wanted to share with you about Parker. One of the things that we find unique to our approach to the consulting world is that our name comes from 2 different combinations. The first PAR comes from paradigm shift, and the last KAR comes from karma. And so we really believe that any change that's going to happen within a company is going to need some sort of shift, some sort of paradigm shift to really make it stick, really make it go into the culture and do its best job, right? And then as you're working in the field, you want to give back, do better than you were before, help the community that you're in. And so we like to have these events and teach what we know, have experts come and share what they know, and just really get into the community that way. All right, so before we get too far into the questions, I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page as far as what blockchain is. So, quick poll of the room, who knows what blockchain is? Okay, who kind of has an idea? And who has no clue? No shame. Okay, so we're a pretty good room. So about everybody has a pretty decent idea. Some people are experts, that's great. We'll have some really great questions from you later, I'm sure. And then as far as industries that you work in, is there anyone here in the commodities trading industry? No. Is there anyone in finance? Okay. What about software development? Okay. What would be some other industries that would be interesting? Lawyers? Okay. Anything else in particular that would help you kind of just answer questions a little bit more?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so that's a good poll of the room. So, Robert,
Sure.
Do you think you could break down blockchain for us, just to make sure we all are on the same page?
Sure. And Lexi, correct me when I go wrong. So blockchain it's basically the base technology for cryptocurrency. It has other applications, but it is the ground floor technology that allows one transaction to move to the next without double spending. So it creates a trust system, or a trustless system, as people say. But it allows all of the other technologies to work. Now, when people say the blockchain, there are actually several blockchains. Ethereum has its own blockchain, Litecoin has its own blockchain. There's a whole bunch of other chains that are actually built on Ethereum, which is a competitor chain. Ethereum is sort of the silver to Bitcoin's gold. Also, when people say that they are mining Bitcoin or mining Ether or mining anything, they're not really mining anything. What they're doing is they're maintaining the network. So think about it as double entry bookkeeping, but on a global scale. And the payment they get for this sort of brute forced computer technology, they have to solve these algorithms. And those algorithms get harder and harder and harder, and so the computing power gets higher and higher and higher. And all these networks of computers compete to solve that algorithm that helps them verify the transactions. So, if I buy pizza with Bitcoin, the block will then verify that, and then that ledger is shared among all of the computers. So again, it's a very democratic process. It helps, again, build trust into a system that needs it. What am I missing, guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was basically covering it. It's kind of a hard question, I find, especially to say, like, what is blockchain in one sentence, since, to really understand blockchain, you have to understand why its first real use case, Bitcoin, was so revolutionary. And some people can even trace it back to, well, if you want to understand Bitcoin, you need to understand, like, why we value things, and, like, why fiat money is of value, fiat, so, like, government issued money, as opposed to digital currency and Bitcoin, which is not issued by any government or company or country. So I think usually what I try to break it down to when I talk about blockchain, in addition to a lot of the things you said, Rob, is the idea that Bitcoin and then ergo blockchain proved for the first time digital scarcity. In a world where, today, if I want to send my sister a picture, maybe a selfie that I took of the two of us, I can send her a copy of that picture, but she doesn't like own that picture now. There's no way to prove that she owns that picture. I still have a copy of it. The internet today is very good at sending information in that way, and so by having the mining techniques, it's very easy with digital currency and blockchain to prove digital scarcity. So this can then facilitate the transference of things of value over the internet in a digitized way. So that's one of the things I like to talk about. Another thing that I think is important is that blockchain is a decentralized database as opposed to a centralized one. So it's, all of these companies that we've been hearing about recently who've been hacked, it's honestly easier to name the ones that haven't been hacked at this point. Deloitte, Equifax, Yahoo, you name it. Some of their issues can kind of be traced to the fact that they're storing customer information in these very vulnerable centralized databases that if one hacker hacks into that, then they suddenly have access to all of this private information. Whereas if you store it in a decentralized manner, and especially when you can record transactions in an immutable way in a blockchain, it's very difficult to steal like tons of information and just have that one honeypot that's vulnerable to that single point of failure. So those are some things I also like to cover. Darren, I'm sure you have more to add.
Yeah, I guess a couple things. Lexi, I'm glad you brought up the decentralized nature because I think that that's crucially important to the blockchain. I also think from a mining perspective, so you mentioned scarcity, and that is usually the case. Of course, the algorithms vary from one currency to another, from one token to another. And that's one of the things that Bitcoin prides itself on, is its digital scarcity. Some don't necessarily, like Dogecoin, for example, which was created as a joke. It's worth about 1/3 of a cent. It will continue to be mined over and over and over, and there is no limit to it. With that said, mining it really provides two purposes. One is to generate new currency at a predictable rate, and the other thing is to confirm transactions, and that's something that it's easier to understand once you've actually done a transaction with Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency. Once you've sent it to someone, you can actually track it and see how many different nodes or how many different computers, miners, whatever you want to call them, on the decentralized network have confirmed your transaction, have recorded it in their version of the blockchain. Because really, that's what's important about the decentralized nature of the blockchain, is that all of the different nodes get updated, but it's not instant. And until enough nodes on the network know about that transaction, it has not been confirmed. It's not really considered complete. And that's one of the, if you want to call it weaknesses of Bitcoin, is that it is often slow and expensive to send peer-to-peer, and that's where some of the other currencies do excel. And in case any of you were interested in getting into mining, it is not an extremely lucrative thing, because there are billionaires out there who have started doing it en masse, so you're competing against them. But for example, if you were to buy a $400 NVIDIA GTX 1070 graphics processor, that $400 you'd recoup in about 15 months. So you're not exactly cleaning up, but you do eventually earn Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies to pay for the hardware and the electricity that you're using to solve these math problems.
Too much or not enough?
Okay, so everyone's pretty decent understanding now, right? Probably more than you were expecting. So what are some of the applications for the blockchain technology? What are the first things that come to mind?
The base one is creating new currencies, but there's all sorts of other applications that you see coming up. Things like tracking an actual supply chain. So the example that people often give is when Chipotle had a food contamination incident, they couldn't track where it came from. So using a blockchain to find out where that food came from every step along the way is one way it can be used. Real estate, that's another way. Legal, again, using smart contracts, and that's sort of an if this, then that sort of protocol that has been used or has said that it could revolutionize both law and real estate. So there's a lot of that. Self-sovereign identity is another one. You will find a lot of libertarians in this field, and they love self-sovereign identity. So you don't need a passport. You need something that sort of proves who you are and allows you to sort of move through the legal world with that.
Decentralized storage is another great application. Historically, if you wanted to set up a location to store pictures or video, you would usually go through one company, or you could put it on your own server that you own or your company owns, or you could put it on Apple's iCloud or Google's cloud. Well, now there's decentralized storage where not only are the files that you're storing replicated across multiple nodes, but they're also being monetized. Instead of paying Google or Apple a certain number of dollars per month or per gigabyte, you are now paying individuals. It's more peer-to-peer. And similarly, much like how you can monetize your computer or your video card by mining cryptocurrency, you can now monetize your hard drive by selling space to people that want to store files.
Yeah, I think those were all terrific examples. Something that I try to think of in terms of blockchain use cases is there are a couple of different avenues you can go on. So the one is using a decentralized database and truly peer-to-peer transactions to try to kind of modernize various existing business processes in operation by kind of sprinkling blockchain dust on them. So that's kind of like some of those are like with supply chain and provenance, and so those are using blockchain technology to track an asset and just make that process much more efficient by using blockchain technology. And then there's kind of the other side of it, which I think is really exciting, and we're kind of getting into now, that has been kind of facilitated by this tokenization process and this kind of big ICO boom that we've been seeing. So ICO, does everyone know what I mean when I say ICO? Initial coin offering, okay, yeah. So that I think has kind of been facilitated by this is trying to come up with new use cases and kind of new businesses and economies that could not have existed without blockchain technology. So I think that's kind of where we're starting to go more now with blockchain, is that first we kind of had large enterprises and companies kind of experimenting with how blockchain could make their processes more efficient, but then now we're kind of getting into this thing with like self-sovereign identity and using tokens within little microeconomies to facilitate, like maybe there's a company that's using a token as a reputation, like to measure someone's reputation within a community. So I think those are kind of the two lenses through which I like to view blockchain use cases kind of more generally.
And actually, I forgot one big one, and that is it changes the way startups work. So what tokenization allows, and again, blockchain is the basis, and what tokenization allows is for startups to raise money by selling tokens, either utility tokens, so think of it as you buy a token for a subway before the subway is built, so you're adding to the startup funds to build that subway, or a security token, which is a security. The only way you would make money on it is if there were dividends or that sort of thing. But it's a way for startups to raise capital without having to have a Series A or having to have investors who then would take a sizable ownership stake in their company. So that is a huge revolution I think we're just seeing the beginning of, and I think it's already been I haven't seen it yet, but I think it's already an episode of Silicon Valley.
I was just gonna say, I was just gonna ask if any of you guys watched Silicon Valley, because we've gotten like so mainstream to this point where they're kind of parodying it on HBO. But yeah, great points.
So we've covered a lot of industries, lawyers, real estate, startups, right? Are there any industries that should not be a part of
Yeah, I mean,
I'll get super snarky. You go.
yeah, I mean, this is honestly something that we run into at Block. Also, since we're working with a lot of like Fortune 50, Fortune 10 type companies, and I would say a good number of the ones that come to us don't really have any idea of why they want to use blockchain. They just know that they saw Long Island iced tea change their name to Long Blockchain, and all of a sudden their stock increased. So it's definitely not the be all end all or panacea, as it were, for every single issue that you have. I mean, there are advantages to centralized databases. Decentralized databases are notoriously slow. So if you're looking for speed, it's probably not the right way to go. So there's definitely you need to be pragmatic about it.
It's also really expensive.
Right.
Jimmy Song, who's a dev guy, just wrote a Medium post, and I think the title of it is "Blockchain is Hard." So it is very expensive. And to talk about how slow things actually are, so Bitcoin, it takes about 10 minutes for a transaction to be verified. That's the speed of the block.
By design,
by
also.
Design.
It's a feature, not a
Litecoin,
bug.
2.5 minutes, is that right? And now there's something that sits on top of Bitcoin and can sit on top of other chains called Lightning that is trying to speed up that transaction. So you need to know what you're getting into. Lexi is right. It is not going to save you. I think some of the energy around this, which is an overall good thing, is I think people who, and brands who did not embrace the internet and then it revolutionized their business or it put them out of business, they see blockchain as that next big technological step, which, by the way, I believe it is. It absolutely is. So people want to get in on the ground floor, but a lot of people just don't know what the ground floor looks like. So you just have to evaluate it, know its limitations, know what it can do, but it's not going to save you. You have to know what it does.
Yeah, I guess in general, I don't think there are any industries that shouldn't. I just think that some should wait and see,
Right.
and all should educate themselves before they jump in. Like you guys said, it can have unforeseen consequences as far as cost, as far as speed, and you really have to evaluate what it is you're trying to accomplish. And speaking of karma, I believe the Long Island blockchain stock ticker has actually been delisted and is now trading OTC on the pink sheets.
Yep.
So there's a reason not to jump in, is you could end up ruining your stock.
Right.
So what are some of the most interesting projects you're seeing right here in Chicago that are getting built around blockchain?
It's like, do I get to say metronome or do you want to say metronome? Lexi, why don't you tell us about metronome?
Yeah, so just to preface this also, so through the Chicago Blockchain Center, we tried to support a lot of the startup efforts, and so we're kind of transitioning this year into becoming a more formalized incubator. So we've seen a lot of different projects ranging from the healthcare space all the way to digital media and advertising. So there's been kind of the gamut in Chicago. Through the state of Illinois, we also worked on a few pilot programs that were being implemented, and some are finishing implementation this year. One was with the Cook County Recorder of Deeds office, and so it was putting land titles and deeds onto the Bitcoin public blockchain in this case. There was another one with healthcare provider registries, another one we're working on with involving birth and death certificates and trying to create a distributed identity that could kind of track a person from cradle to grave, and amongst various others. But kind of more personally, my company Block has been involved in a project called Metronome, and personally, it's one project of kind of a lot out there that are trying to solve issues surrounding interoperability between different cryptocurrencies and different blockchains. So I'm not on the Metronome team at Block, but in essence, it was kind of meant to be a very predictable cryptocurrency that also has this feature of cross-blockchain portability. So through the use of Ethereum virtual machines, Metronome will be born on Ethereum, and we're launching it officially June 18th. But then you'll be able to actually port your actual asset, the Metronome tokens, onto a Rootstock, Quantum, Ethereum Classic, and whatever other rails have been built out at that time. So it's not trying to change or maybe Bitcoin to Ethereum, where you kind of lose some of the value in that transaction, but you'll be able to retain your original asset, but then have some of the other features that are aligned with whatever chain you're a part of. So that's one project that we're really excited about.
And the interesting thing about that is, think about if Chase Bank had its own currency, but you couldn't spend it any place else but Chase Bank.
Right.
So Metronome, again, which is an interesting thing coming out of Chicago, solves that issue.
I guess just based on things I've read online, Omega Grid sounds interesting to me. Kind of like peer-to-peer energy, energy sales. Basically, you as a consumer, if you for some reason happen to have a solar panel, you can monetize the extra energy that you are generating in addition to what you're using at that moment to put out on the grid. Also allows for the purchase of energy at wholesale prices, which obviously is very attractive, getting it at a discount to retail, but kind of taking it away from the centralized ComEd and their competitors and being able to go peer-to-peer. I really think peer-to-peer has been a big thing since Napster came out, in the late 90s, and I think that there's so many different, Uber, in the past 10 years, there's so many different applications. The idea of being able to do this with electricity is kind of cool.
Right.
Yeah. That's the other thing. Imagine Uber without Uber. Like that is something that is possible. You can become your own service without a middleman. So that's there are a lot of business applications where that is happening.
And what about outside the Chicago space? Are there any projects that are happening around the world that you've heard of that you just I wish this was happening in Chicago, maybe we can make this happen here?
So I'm going to recuse myself because we try to just sort of report on them rather than become boosters for them, so I'll let you guys answer that.
Sure. Yeah, you can take the first stab.
Well, one that I'm inspired by, and it's because I personally am writing a white paper about a similar concept, and actually started writing it before I learned that there was something else out there, which any good idea, of course someone else is already working on it, is a cryptocurrency called Basis. And really one of the big problems with Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple, and most other cryptocurrencies is they are not stable. And so think about if you're Jewel or a private, small grocery store, and so you're paying for now you're paying U.S. dollars for your electricity, for your rent, for your employees' salaries, and for your product, for the food that you're selling. Well, if all of a sudden you start offering that food for Bitcoin, and Bitcoin drops 20% in a day, well, your costs are fixed, but you are now taking in 20% less in revenue, unless you immediately go ahead and hike up prices by 20% basis Bitcoin, which means that you've got way more overhead in terms of changing stuff around, and your customer is going to have trouble keeping track of, okay, well, yesterday it was 0.007 Bitcoin. Today it's 0.008 Bitcoin. What does that mean? I don't really. And so Basis is a stable cryptocurrency that follows the same concept that central banks do, which I am not in any way supporting central banks, but it uses an algorithm that provides stabilization, and I think that is ultimately what it's going to take in order for us to get to a point where your average consumer and your average small business starts transacting in cryptocurrency. So yeah, that's Basis. One other that I would mention, I'll just put the name to the description. Earlier I mentioned decentralized storage. Storage with a J at the end is the name of the project. It's actually a currency that's been out at least since late 2017. Yeah, I mean, again, I think that it's important to allow these decentralized applications for all sorts of commoditized areas of our technology world to continue to grow, and storage was, one of the earlier ones there. So I think that it's kind of cool what they're doing.
Right. Yeah, those are all great examples. I really like things like Storage and SiaCoin that are kind of doing decentralized storage. And I think that there's been a lot of criticism recently for some of those projects. People were saying like, oh, well, what if someone unknowingly stores child porn on their, their computer unknowingly? But I mean, I think a lot of those concerns kind of don't take account the fact that each one of those transactions are encrypted, and so there's not a lot of transparency for that kind of thing. But I think there are a lot of really interesting projects coming out right now worldwide. We're in this technology is still less than 10 years old, so despite kind of the big growth, there's still a lot of navigation that needs to be done in terms of new innovations and how the regulatory space responds to them. So, like for example, you were talking about utility tokens versus security tokens. So this is one of the big problems facing the United States, I think at least, and has caused, in my opinion, kind of a brain drain of really interesting projects from being headquartered in the States, is that there really is not a lot of regulatory clarity from the federal government. A lot of the states have kind of taken it upon themselves, like Wyoming just passed some laws recently that kind of clarified their stance towards ICOs and cryptocurrencies. State of Illinois has been kind of leading the way in that as well. But from the federal government perspective, so there are lots of agencies that kind of all describe cryptocurrency and blockchain technology as something different. So you have the CFTC classifies cryptocurrency as a commodity. The SEC says it's a security. The IRS says that it is property. So if you had to do, include cryptocurrency in your taxes this year, you had to record capital gains. Exactly. So it's just, it's
even talking about this makes me.
It's past April, we're fine. But yeah. So I think that's one of the things that I think personally, there's a lot of other different countries that actually, who I've found have maybe more authoritarian regimes, you could say, have kind of taken an interest in cryptocurrency, I think, because they recognize that it's this, completely decentralized, very transparent platform, so that might be, easier to control and audit than some other technologies that might be trying to record the same information. Who knows? But yeah. So I think that's kind of where I see we need to get to a place where at the very least federally in the United States, we have much more clear regulations, so that a lot of these really cool, innovative new projects aren't scared of existing here.
And what would be your estimation on how long that's going to take, if you could throw out a number?
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of really great firms out there. So one of the Chicago Blockchain Center's supporters is the Chamber of Digital Commerce. So they're the largest trade organization in this space, and they work directly with all of those agencies that I listed to try to educate them on what this stuff is and show that it's not scary, and Bitcoin isn't just being used by drug lords and for illicit activities online. So there's another organization called Coin Center. They put out a lot of, they're a great resource I would recommend for a lot of great reading on, they created a regulatory primer around this, which is of course out of date as soon as this has become printed, but still worth a good read nonetheless. I don't know, it's really hard to say. I think a lot of, part of the the benefit with the huge price hike that we saw in December with Bitcoin is that we were sort of thrust into the mainstream. So whereas maybe regulators before, so like the Chamber of Digital Commerce, they've been around for 4 years, and so they've been trying to talk to regulators about this since then. And kind of now they're really starting to pay attention. So it could be, next week that we have, the SEC puts out something and says, oh, I don't think all, what was that quote that he said? He was like,
yeah, it's not all property. I mean,
Right,
the problem is that a cryptocurrency is just a new asset class.
Right.
It doesn't fit.
It doesn't fit. It is not truly a commodity. It's not truly a security.
Yeah.
It is many things. So it is a tip of the hat, I guess, to the innovators that people cannot classify it. So you have the need to protect consumers on one hand, but the need for innovation on the other. So we're caught in that friction right now. I think at Consensus, which was this giant convention that Lexi and I went to in New York, I think the SEC said there is no imminent decision being made. So like not next week, but we're past next week.
Right, and this was after they had made this kind of sweeping statement where he said, I don't think any token I have seen isn't a security, which obviously was scaring a lot of people. I think since he made that statement, he kind of walked back his phrasing a little bit. He's like, well, maybe not everyone, and that's just the ones I've seen, but still. But so a little bit stalled, but.
So now that we've kind of covered like the basics of Bitcoin, or sorry, the basics of blockchain and the different industries that are involved in the different projects. So if someone was looking to get started in blockchain for their company or for themselves, at the most simplistic steps, what would be the building blocks that they would need to get started?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I recommend to everybody, is read the Bitcoin white paper. Just before you do anything, read the Bitcoin white paper. That is, in Satoshi Nakamoto's own words, what he intended Bitcoin to be. It's just, I think that's required reading for everybody. Not a lot of people get around that because they're like, oh, I want to know about blockchain, I don't care about Bitcoin. But if you don't understand that white paper, or at least have read it a couple of times, then blockchain is going to be much more difficult to understand, in my opinion. There are a lot of great books out there also that have been written on the subject. There's Andreas Antonopoulos is a great author, so he's written books like The Internet of Money, Mastering Bitcoin, which is kind of the Bitcoin Bible from a programmer's perspective, which is great reading if you're a developer. One book that I read that really kind of changed my perspective on the whole cryptocurrency space was The Age of Cryptocurrency by Paul Vigna and Michael Casey. They're both journalists. So that's kind of where I would start.
Yeah, digital gold is
Great.
wonderfully. It's more colorful.
Kind of reads like a novel.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. And everybody in this space also has read The History of Debt. Or was it called Debt, A History, or A History of Debt? I forget. It's got a receipt on the cover. But that is required reading. By the way, we dropped the name Satoshi Nakamoto. Does everybody know who that is?
There we go.
Okay. So I see a couple of nods. So Satoshi is a pseudonym for someone who we don't know. We are on the 10th anniversary this year of his white paper, and we think it's he for several reasons, but it's either a single person or a few people. There's a lot of amazing reporting about who people think it is, but the person posing as Satoshi disappeared how many years ago? Like 6? Was it 4 years after that he disappeared?
Yeah, something like that.
But anyway, the philosophical and technical foundation for cryptocurrency is that white paper, and it's free. You can find it anywhere. It's not that long.
It's like 9 pages with some diagrams, so you'll get through it quickly. Yeah.
But it is the foundational document, and I've heard people say that the most important part of this whole movement is that someone could, with a pseudonym, post something online for free and change the world. That is the real revolution of what we're talking about. It's also fascinating. If you love a detective story, there's all sorts of amazing reporting and misreporting about it. It's sort of a parlor game among crypto geeks. So come join us.
Other than that, personally, I just like hopping on Google, search for Bitcoin news, blockchain news, see what's out there. And definitely read the white paper. There's actually some decent, there's a lot of crap on YouTube, but there's some decent stuff if you know what to look for. And there's actually a piece on Netflix too that I thought was kind of interesting as far as like getting some insight into the early days and some of the guys who communicated with Satoshi and were involved in starting their own projects related to Bitcoin.
You remember the title? Which one is that?
Banking on blockchain.
Banking on blockchain.
Yeah, banking on blockchain.
I was so.
On Bitcoin.
I was so afraid you were going to talk about the John McAfee documentary.
No, but
who was also involved. Buyer beware. That's all I'm saying about that documentary.
Yeah, if you're looking for some cheap entertainment, just Google John McAfee.
It's horrifying. It is horrifying. Let's not talk about it anymore.
That reminds me also, Andreas Antonopoulos has some really good videos, which I think are really good. And he's being a very brilliant man, is kind of very, very good at parsing down a lot of these really difficult ideas in a more digestible way. So yeah, definitely those are some of my favorite videos on YouTube on the subject.
And so what kind of technical skills do you need to really get involved in a blockchain project? Just to get started.
So the technology itself is open source. There are a couple of blockchains that you can just go, download the code, and augment it as you like. The augmentation as you like is an expensive, time-consuming process that should be both expensive and time-consuming. It takes a high level of expertise and should not be treaded into lightly. Am I overstating the case?
I think that's fair. Among other things, I consider myself a software developer. I've not yet attempted to do any blockchain development. I have actually considered, so what I believe is a competitor to Ethereum is Waves. And I'm not, I guess, I'm not educated enough at this point to say that developing on the Waves platform would be easier than Ethereum, but that's something I actually considered pursuing, just haven't done at this point. And for someone that does have developer skills, it's kind of it's something that I think would be a fun proof of concept. It's not something that you could expect with any small to medium amount of time or effort would turn into an actual company or coin or whatever, but you could at least go through the steps to understand it better. And like I said, I have not. That's something that's on my to-do list.
Yeah. I think, honestly, one of the great things about the fact that you all are in this room right now is that it's still really very early days in this space. The tech is still nascent. I think there's room for back-end developers, front-end developers. A lot of the projects that have been out for a while have horrible UI UX. So there's room for any kind of technologist. There's room for business folks who need to kind of present the business use cases for this. For lawyers also, since we're still navigating a lot of the regulatory space as we talked about before. So my advice is that if you're interested in starting a project, try to find other folks who are like-minded or friends whose skills are complementary to yours, whether it's from the tech or biz dev side. But there's room for lots of different talents in the space at this time, I think.
Yeah, and it only gets bigger and more energy and more talent. Mm-hmm. We talked about Consensus, which was in New York this last year. This June. Wait, what's it June? No, wait, April.
May.
Yeah. Oh, we're still in May. I was in New York in May. Oh, man. 8,500 people.
Yeah.
Last year, 2,000 people. So it has sort of an exponential growth happening.
If you could name one, what do you think is going to be the biggest pitfall of blockchain?
Speed. It's speed right now. Speed.
It was a couple months ago, I read about something that Lexi brought up, which was that it was discovered that there is the ability to store child pornography on and other things that are illegal in many, if not most, countries. That concerns me because technically, short of having a wallet, a Bitcoin wallet, an Ethereum wallet, Litecoin wallet with currency, I'm not as concerned about that as an individual consumer, but the idea of mining, people who mine and are actually they own the blockchain. They have copies of the blockchain and are augmenting it. And so I'm concerned that once this becomes more well known among regulators and governments, we could see some hiccups. So with that said, again, more so than just the technology, I come from the finance side, expect volatility to continue. I think we will see significant up moves and significant down moves to a point that most people cannot stomach. We could even have more news a year from now where people are like, is this the end of Bitcoin? Which finally this year, I think at least people in the community are relieved that most people are no longer making that assertion that this is most people understand this is here to stay, but there will continue to be hiccups, and yeah, the fact that you can store things that are illegal on a blockchain without, maybe there's some way to solve that problem, but then you get into censorship issues. So every new technology has its issues, and that's one that I see.
Yeah, I think just kind of going off of the idea that this is still a very new technology, I think lack of education is still a big problem that we're facing, and I think part of that has to do with a lot of the mainstream media sources kind of misreporting on the subject. That's why I think it's so important to have specific periodicals that are focused just on blockchain and cryptocurrency and are actually reporting accurately on it instead of reporting on kind of the horse race aspect of, oh, the price went down today, now it's a bull market, now it's a bear market, and that's all the Wall Street Journal can talk about Bitcoin is where the price is, instead of talking about the really interesting projects. So I think that's one big issue is kind of public perception and a lack of real clear education as to what the value proposition of this is, some of the pitfalls that we're at right now, and just kind of understanding some of our growing pains so that we can work through them. But I'll kind of end all of that with this comment. There was, I hate to be bringing up Andreas Antonopoulos again, but he's really just.
Are you dating? You can let us out. He seems like a nice Greek boy.
We're just both Greek. Yeah, no, exactly. But in my mother's dreams, maybe. Okay. But anyway, he gave a talk at the Bitcoin and Open Blockchain meetup, which is one of the longest standing meetups in Chicago. It's one of the largest ones, I think, actually nationally. And so he gave a talk there, and someone was asking a question at the end, and he said, okay, Andreas, who would you say is your, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, who would you say is your intellectual equal? So who's the person who's just the ultra, like not Bitcoin maximalist, but just is completely against Bitcoin, but has done as much study and is as smart as you on the subject? Like who would that person be, and what would a debate between the two of you look like, do you think? And would you be open to doing that kind of a debate? And so he kind of paused for a second and he said, honestly, everyone who I've known who has taken the time to really try to understand this technology usually ends up on the side of being in favor of the fact that it's going to be world altering, which I think was really telling. And I don't think no one was paying him to say that or anything. I think that was his honest, genuine assessment. So I think that's an interesting anecdote.
This is the most exciting money has been since Hamilton. It really, truly.
Yeah. And so we talked about the exponential growth of blockchain. You said 2,000 people showed up at this conference last year, and now it's 8,000. So if you could get out your crystal ball, where do you think blockchain is going to be, 1 year, 5 year, 10 years from now?
Dan has already grabbed the mic. Go, Dan, go.
A year from now, I think that we're still going to be at a point where fiat currency is being largely used for transactions. I think that there will be substantially more projects as more and more people transition from traditional technology and traditional finance and traditional manufacturing companies to thinking about ways to make it better. And that's not an easy question. It's not obvious, but when you've got millions of people thinking about a problem, that's solutions come quickly. And I mean, there's definitely significant social and economic benefits to solving this problem. So people tend to be motivated to do so. 5 years from now, I think, so we're talking now 2023. I think it'll be mainstream. I think that the US dollar will still be widely used for currency. And the biggest question is, what will people be using from a digital currency perspective? Last year, I started to wane off of the Bitcoin bandwagon. I'm moving back onto it, but I also think that Bitcoin Cash, Zcash, Monero, I think that there's a lot of strong candidates out there. And I don't think there will be one, just like there isn't one currency. There's, hundreds of currencies around the world, but most of them are not nearly as stable or nearly as widely used as the US dollar or the euro, which, by the way, I think 5 years from now we may not have the euro anymore either. But, and in fact, I think that what's happening, although today's news seems a little bit more in favor of the euro, what's happening in Italy right now, those type of things, I mean, we absolutely saw a surge in cryptocurrencies yesterday on the potential default of the Italian government, and the fact that they used to be able, just a month or two ago, they could borrow at negative interest rates, and now it costs them like 3%. So anyway, I digress, but and then 10 years from now, yeah, I think that most companies will be using blockchain. I think that most tech companies will be fundraising with maybe not ICOs, maybe some new version of ICOs. And I absolutely think that we will have fast, virtually free transactions. You probably won't even have to use a phone. It'll be like fist bumping someone, basically. Or, there's a commercial I saw recently. I don't know if it was on actual television or, the internet or whatever, but some guy it seemed like he was in Little Italy in New York, and he was on the street, and there was a scarf and some sunglasses and a hat, and I think it was probably a Chase commercial, but the point was he was instantaneously buying these things, and they were just flying onto his body. Well, of course, that's an exaggeration, but it may become more and more seamless, and I do think that we'll be able to monetize more of our existence. I mean, I think that automation is going to allow people to work less, but I think a lot of the things that we do can provide value to the world one way or another, whether it's through entertainment like YouTube stars or gamers, or I mean, even just sharing metrics on what your brain temperature is or what's going on with your internals. That those type of things I think could help revolutionize research in the biomedical areas, and the idea of being able to get paid for that. I mean, right now we're using Facebook and other social networks for free because we're monetizing our privacy. So that's just the next step, I believe, for those of us who want to partake.
Yeah. No, I love that, and how you said how we can monetize our existence. I think that's just one of the really attractive things about this whole space is that it has an answer to kind of dealing with how other companies use our own personal data, the fact that we kind of Facebook has figured out a way to monetize narcissism, I like to say, in that, with the Cambridge Analytica hack, as part of the big issue with that is that you could kind of see it in some of the congressmen who were kind of questioning Mark Zuckerberg about this. He said, well, how did you get my information? Well, you uploaded and you checked in that you were at this location, and then you uploaded pictures of your infant child onto social media. So you gave that information willingly and for free for this, so you could have access to this service. And so the users become the products as opposed to the customers. And so the customers are now the ad agencies. And so what if you were able to use this new technology to just upend that whole model, and all of a sudden companies would have to pay for you to give over your data and information, and you could get compensated for that somehow, and receive payouts in cryptocurrency. I think that idea is so fundamental and so pervasive. I think worldwide it's an issue that we're facing, and I think blockchain is one of the things that's really going to solve it.
And I'll keep mine more brief. I'm just going to add 5 years to everything these guys said. I think it's just going to take a little bit longer. I think until there are apps or processes that have a better user interface, my mom is not going to use it. My brother and sister are not going to use it. Right now, it's a very specialized use case. We are, even though consensus was huge, it's still not a big part of the population. So it's not a populist movement yet. So maybe not 5 years, maybe 10 years. But we're not that far away from like trucks that make their own pizza and deliver it to you hot. So I'm not kidding. Like that is 2 years away, if that. All you do is load ingredients into the truck and there's no driver.
3D printed.
Yeah.
Okay, and so when we'd met a couple of weeks ago to kind of discuss questions, we kind of came up with a fun question, just kind of a brain teaser. So they've had a little while to think about this, so I'm curious to see what their answer is. But if you could think back to a classic movie, right, that happened in our childhood or as we were being, in high school or even college, there's some sort of heist or something that happened where they stole something, right? So like, which classic movie could not have existed if blockchain existed when the movie came out?
I was gonna say, I said this jokingly on the phone, but like Ocean's 11, like it would be the most boring movie ever because people just moving code around, and it would not have a satisfying ending. But also, like literally, the Maltese Falcon. The Maltese Falcon is about where a MacGuffin is. It's where this object is. Yeah, if it was a digital asset, you'd know.
Yeah, something that came to mind for me was Back to the Future. I mean, if you've got a shared decentralized blockchain to record events, transactions, identities, well, you go back or forward in time, you are now going to you're going to do something to violate what that blockchain says, and I don't know. I think that it would cause a lot of problems for Marty McFly.
Yeah, it's like your mom would still try to make out with you.
Yeah, I was going to say something along the lines of Blood Diamond, actually. And there's one of the earlier blockchain companies. They were called Everledger, and so what they did was try to track provenance of diamonds. So, kind of maybe that movie wouldn't have been had some of its more controversial elements if we were able to source exactly where that diamond came from. But
it'd be over pretty quickly.
Right.
It is or it isn't. Right. So for everyone in the room, if they want to get involved in blockchain even more than they are now, or maybe they're just starting to get involved, what would be the one thing you would say to do in the Chicago market?
Email Lexi.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say join the Chicago Blockchain Center mailing list. So one of the things we've tried to do is we host a lot of the long-standing blockchain meetups. So some of these are like the Chicago Ethereum meetup, the Bitcoin and Open Blockchain meetup. We have various other industry-specific ones like the Chicago Blockchain Real Estate Collective. More recently, we've been starting to do startup spotlights also, where we take really interesting projects and bring in either their founders or an ambassador and kind of highlight them. We're doing one next month with FlurryDB, which is databases and blockchain. We're doing one with the Waves platform ambassador actually in July. So yeah, one of our goals is to try to connect everyone with kind of all the really interesting projects that are already ongoing in Chicago.
And if you haven't already, so Blockchain News is not only a news website, but we have a newsletter that comes out every week. So the URL is the-blockchain.com, or we're the first result that comes up for blockchain news. So we do not just local, but we do international news. But it's a good place to sort of get a foundation of knowledge.
And yeah, Lexi used the word meetup a lot. That's my recommendation. If you don't have the app, install it, hop on the website and just find, I don't know if it's every day, but there's a lot of meetups going on in Chicago.
It's closed every day now, yeah.
Definitely. Well, let's get another round of applause for our experts up here. So, really glad they could join us, but now we want to hear from you, and what questions do you have for our panelists tonight?
You mentioned Consensus. Is that the same organization that runs Consensus Academy?
Yeah, that's actually, so it's kind of confusing. So Consensus, the conference, is with a U. Consensus with a Y is the company based in Brooklyn, and they have a lot of different projects. But yeah, so they're actually different. Yeah.
How do you feel about their training? I'm enrolled to start to do it.
Oh yeah, I mean I've heard nothing but good things, honestly. There's kind of a local Chicagoan named Dave Conroy who just joined one of their real estate projects actually. So yeah, I mean friends that I know that have taken their academies have really liked it. So yeah, go for it.
Yeah, you'll find, by the way, in the crypto space, everything has about 3 root words. So it's like coin, or bit, or yeah. So yeah, don't. It's worse than regular startups because they're all squatting on like the same 2 or 3 words. So who else? Yes, sir.
So obviously there are crypto exchanges and whatnot, but is there any possibility of blockchain being involved with the general financial markets, whether it's FX, futures, stocks, because I'm not sure that would change that entire market at all. If I work in finance, I would definitely lose my job if that were the case, because I just picture my client a broker match and would assume blockchain would solve.
So the answer to your question is yes.
Yeah.
That's it. So blockchain is coming to mainstream Wall Street, all investor classes. People are afraid that their jobs are going to go away, whether that is in finance or in real estate. And I think some of that is unfounded. Some functions will go away, but they'll also move, and blockchain has the ability to create new jobs and new functions as well. So it is a disruptive technology, and yes, it will go mainstream just 5 years later than everybody thinks.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that outside of crypto exchanges, yeah, Bitcoin futures did get listed on the CBOE and on CME in December. I think Toronto Stock Exchange is looking into listing something similar as well. I mean, the Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase is infamous for denouncing Bitcoin. I don't know if it was November, or it was probably earlier than November. And in the meantime, JP Morgan's Quorum project is a blockchain project they've been working on for some time. Anyone who wants to survive in the finance community is starting to think about it. It's not going to, I mean, I work in the finance community, and it is, other than watching CNBC, it is completely outside of everything we do every day, but it's coming, and it will, I'd say 5 years from now, it will be pervasive.
10 years, but
Yeah,
the call is coming from inside the house.
Five Darren years.
Okay.
Yeah, there have also been some interesting projects which are trying to tokenize traditional assets as well. So like tokenize securities, tokenize some commodities. We can touch base afterwards. I can give you a list of some of those companies. I'm not remembering offhand, but yeah, definitely some that are in existence right now.
What other questions do we have?
Yeah. So So the question was, please stop me if I missed any of this, is that are a lot of these new projects that have been cropping up, are they new networks or are they being built on top of other networks? If I summarize that, okay. And so I think the short answer, a lot of the ICOs are based on an ERC20 protocol, which is built on top of Ethereum. So they're basically a series of smart contracts that can kind of create a new token. So a lot of those projects, those are built on top of Ethereum or maybe some other smart contract platform, Stellar, Waves, whatever. Those are the majority of the new projects. There's a website called Smith & Crown, which has been trying to track a lot of those new network type projects that you were talking about, and they're trying to do less of the built on top of network projects. But yeah, the majority, the kind of explosion that we had last year was in smart contract tokens that were built on top of existing networks and platforms already.
Do we know what the metric is? I mean, like most stuff,
it's something
right?
like 1,500, yeah.
But what percentage of all tokens? Like it's huge, but most of it, because they want to trade on Ethereum, is built off that protocol.
Yeah.
But again, we mentioned Waves. There's also Neo, which is a competitive blockchain.
Popular in Asia.
Yeah, popular in Asia. So early days. There was one in the back.
I think Darren was going to add to that.
Yeah,
I'm so sorry, Darren.
I was just going to say, as a result of so many of these being built on the Ethereum platform, whenever negative news comes out about ICOs, it tends to affect the price of Ethereum because cryptocurrency doesn't have intrinsic value, but its value is derived from its utility, and Ethereum's utility exists largely because you can start a company and monetize it by creating a token using its smart contract platform.
CryptoKitties.
Yes.
And so we were going to get through the whole night without mentioning CryptoKitties, but thank you, sir. Thank you. Who in the back?
With so many different blockchains coming up and so many different projects, where do you see the challenges in terms of how they interface one another? Do they need to interface one another or not? Similar to, for example, phone carriers and how we always started between Verizon, Sprint, AT&T, you want to do this, you got to do that person. How does that become a seamless, experience for people 10 years from now, and how they interface with blockchain?
So this is the point where I do the full disclosure, and that is, so my parent company, New Alchemy, has a product called Deluge that is cross-chain technology. I think Metronome hopes to solve some of this as well because it moves things across chains. So I think that sort of functionality is necessary for the ecosystem to survive, because otherwise you just have sort of parallel lanes all going the same directions at different speeds. Have I over or under answered your question?
No, I think that's...
No, yeah, and just to add to that, so the kind of interoperability point that Darren was bringing up earlier, and that he kind of mentioned that there's not going to be one cryptocurrency that's going to win at the end of the day. I don't think, at least. There are some people who think it's going to be Bitcoin, and so they've been focusing on a lot of some of the scaling issues associated with it, building the Lightning Network, or maybe scaling out by doing other things. But I think interoperability between those tokens, whether it's through an interoperability network or like a cryptocurrency that's interoperable between different chains, is going to be really important, and is frankly what's cement right now. It's kind of still in the process of being built at the moment.
Yeah, and I would just say that there are a number of apps you can download on your phone that serve as multi-currency wallets. And I think that we're a long way off from it being seamless, but you know, it exists, it has existed, but we're moving in that direction.
I don't want it to just be seamless. I want it to be fun. Like I really think
Like gamified, or yeah.
Well, not just that, but like it just has to be easier to use so that people's heads don't explode when you say crypto or blockchain. It has to be normalized and mainstreamed for it to become bigger than us.
For sure. Any other final questions?
We're going to hang out.
Yeah.
So we're going to be around.
So if I had Bitcoin today, what are people buying with that, other than exchanging it for dollars?
So there are a bunch of different vendors that take Bitcoin, and some mainstream ones. You could have bought a 50-cent album. By the way, which I think is brilliant, because when he took in, and this is a few years ago, you could buy his album using Bitcoin. If he just sat on that Bitcoin, he made more money off of that album than probably sales. Cheap airfare? What are some of the vendors?
Expedia.
Cheap Air, yeah.
Cheap Air.
Oh yeah, and then Overstock. I actually was looking at buying an anniversary gift for my wife on Overstock, but it was cheaper using good old US dollars on eBay, so I went that route.
Okay.
Subway, I think, actually takes some cryptos. Yeah, so there's various vendors.
There's also this new concept. Is it Huddle or Hurdle? I'm miss.
Hodl?
Hodl. Yes, that's good. See, I was mixing it with Hodor.
HODL.
Yeah, HODL, which came off of a drunk discussion and what rant of what people are doing with Bitcoin, which is they're hoarding it. Because there's scarcity, because there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin, people hoard it as an asset. So, you know, and there's a lot of debate on whether that is the proper way to do things, because in order for cryptocurrency to be viable, it has to be liquid. People have to use it. But again, it comes back to the debate, like, what is it? It's a different kind of asset. And I think things like Neo and everything built on the Ethereum platform, that kind of liquidity is very important. And the more vendors, I think one thing that I will align with Darren on, I think in 5 years, most places will probably take some form of crypto. I think it'll just be like Visa, MasterCard, crypto. So I think that will be normalized in 5 years. Whether it'll be mainstream, I think is another thing.
Yeah, and I'll mention that I'm trying to remember if it's called BitGo. There's a company that's existed for at least a couple of years that basically allows you to use, I mean, there's multiple now, but this was one of the first, basically allows you to use a debit card to spend Bitcoin, and I think they've expanded to other coins. Yeah. And I mean, that makes accessibility basically to anyone who accepts Visa.
Yeah, there's a Chinese company doing that as well. So there's, but what we really want to know is, what are you going to get your wife? That's what we want to know.
Oh no!
Did that happen already?
Yeah, that was in December.
Oh, okay.
So actually, it's good. It would have been good if I had to sell the Bitcoin, transfer it to US dollars, and then, but yeah, at least I purchased it when Bitcoin was relatively high.
Okay, so you're not going to tell us what you bought. Great.
So I have a follow-up question. So in this vision of the world where it's Visa, MasterCard, crypto, do you think it's going to be crypto across the field, or do you think it's going to be like specific to like a Subway coin, or you know?
Everything in both. I think there will, so for Visa and MasterCard, there will be Ether and Bitcoin, like silver and gold. And then there will be some, there'll be probably like a top three, just because you can't accommodate everything. Ethereum, that platform, and everything built on top of that protocol, it's easier because that's like the same pond. What am I getting right? What am I not getting right?
No, I think that's a really good summation. I think Ethereum and its associated crypto Ether, I think those are kind of more suited to funding, like distributed apps, distributed applications, more than they are maybe for point of sale. I actually use Dogecoin a lot for point of sale because it's fairly stable. It's got actually a great developer community. So yeah, I think I don't think there's going to be like, you know, top 10 even that are going to be competing for point of sale. I think there might be ones that are more specific to certain industries or for larger payments or smaller payments. Yeah, there's going to be a whole kind of network of them.
And to tie this together with what you were talking about with HODL, I mean, different currencies serve different purposes. Yeah. One of the reasons people hoard Bitcoin is because it's like the digital gold. It's a store of value. It's your savings account. It's not your checking account. You know, it's the gold you have in your safe for when you want to go buy a boat or a car or a condo. Whereas maybe you're going to use Ripple or Dogecoin or Stellar or, you know, one of the more liquid, more easily accessible tokens. And I mean, I think that's yet to be seen. Right. Everyone's duking it out to figure out who's going to win, but it's much like how a lot of places would take Visa or MasterCard, wouldn't take Discover or American Express, and that gets to the point of cost too. I mean, I have transferred Ripple quickly. I've transferred Zcash at virtually no cost. I've transferred Bitcoin and it was quite expensive and it took a couple hours. So, but it's a lot faster than sending gold across the globe.
The minute Costco accepts any cryptocurrency, then we've gone mainstream.
And so I have one more follow-up, and then I'm going to throw it back to you guys. But it came to my mind while we were talking about this. So how far off do you think we are from combining all of these like customer rewards points to just like one cryptocurrency?
Can we do that now?
Can we do it now? Like, I'm sick of punch cards and stars.
I like visit Lifeway, which used to be another company for the like kefir smoothies, and I lose the card every time.
Who knows where they are?
Yeah, I thought Belly was going to do it.
They did try.
And I think there's room for something like that. I would love to hear from you guys.
I think that's great because, yeah, I've lost sleep over like unspent Southwest vouchers and, you know, that were going to expire at a certain time, and some American Express gift card that I had in a drawer somewhere. And I mean, that's a great case for the blockchain, is you don't have to keep track of it. It's already being kept track of.
So we talk a lot about the Ethereum platform, but I hear a lot of, some of the big companies like the IBMs, Cisco, Hitachi of this world are putting a lot of their weight and contribution into the hyperledger. Can you help me understand the difference between these two platforms and these two frameworks, and why one or the other?
Yeah.
So, do we want to repeat the question?
Yes.
So hyperledger and Ethereum, and understand.
Yeah, so you're kind of at, just for those who didn't hear the question, he's saying that larger companies like IBM are putting a lot of money into Hyperledger as opposed to some of the other protocols like Ethereum and Bitcoin, in summation. Yeah, so this kind of goes back to our more definition of blockchain, in that there are different types of blockchains. There's the public ones, so the biggest one by market cap is Bitcoin, Ethereum, Zcash, all those that are public ledgers. A lot of them are permissionless, so you don't need any kind of permission to kind of enter into and participate in that ecosystem. There are different private blockchains as well, which a lot of the a lot of the larger use cases that you're seeing really big companies kind of experimenting with, a lot of them are using private blockchains or ones that they've built themselves. So Hyperledger kind of more falls into that category, but it's a little bit of a hybrid. But yeah, so that just, there's varying different types of blockchains, and so
private versus public.
Right.
That's basically it.
Right.
You talk about spending cryptocurrency, but you also mentioned that it's not defined as an asset class. So right now you cannot spend a Google stock at Starbucks. what do you think would be a solution, like how IRS can treat it, so you don't have to include your overstock purchases in your 1040 form?
I think Darren said it, which is that credit card. People might just sit on Bitcoin. They might not spend it at all. I know people who do, and Ethereum again just has, for all of that community, there's just more liquidity, so people use it differently. But I think getting to that level where it's a card or it's an app on your phone. I have Apple Pay on my card, but I use it really just for Uber, because almost no place else will take it. So it's mainstream because it's on your phone, but people aren't using it, at least not at the rates I think we'd like to see. No.
If it's an asset which you buy at one price and then sell this price, then you have to have some capital gain, capital loss.
Yep.
Right.
And what do you think would be a tax situation for that? If you bought something, if you bought Bitcoin at one price, spend it on another, and how IRS can address it?
Yeah, so how do you, I'm repeating the question, how do you reconcile if you buy Bitcoin at one, or you buy any digital asset at one price and it drops or raises? So in the US, yeah, it's capital gains and capital loss. You have to keep track. I see a lawyer down here. So that is how things operate this year. It will change.
Yeah, I would refer you to Coin Center's website. They've got a lot of really good thought leadership articles on this topic specifically. There's not too much consensus around now as to what the solution should be necessarily. There's still a lot of discussions. There's a blockchain caucus in Congress actually, which is talking about this right now. It's a kind of bipartisan effort, which is cool too. So yeah, if you want, we can connect later. I can send you some resources which kind of dive into this topic more deeply.
I'll also mention, it's been well over a year, probably 2 to 3 years now, that we've seen actual houses and condos bought and sold for Bitcoin. And I say Bitcoin because I honestly haven't heard of any other cryptocurrency being used for it. And in that specific case, what I've heard is the person accepting the Bitcoin, let's say you sell a house for $300,000, which if I do a little mental math, that's what, 400 or 40 Bitcoin. If you owned that house outright, you didn't have to, pay off what you owed to the bank. You accepted that 40 Bitcoin, and you do not have to pay any taxes on that. However, if you then immediately within the year sell that Bitcoin, then you do have to pay capital gains tax, which I don't know if that's marked to 0 exactly, but
again, it is all evolving, yeah. And if you think people in government understand it, just watch the Facebook hearings again. If our public representatives do not understand Facebook, blockchain is much harder. So it all will evolve, and again, I predict it will go mainstream at some point.
Fantastic. All right, let's get another round of applause for our panelists.